We will call this meeting of the Fargo School Board to order. We do have an agenda in front of us. I would entertain a motion.
I move adoption of the agenda as provided.
Motion has a second. And any other questions, comments? Okay. All those in favor of following the agenda as presented, please vote by saying yes.
Yes.
Any opposed, no. Guest report. We have a lot of people here tonight. We're very excited. So, Mr. Hanson, would you like to do the introductions?
Good evening, I will. We have lots of kids who we're going to introduce in a minute. We have two of our teachers here from Kennedy Elementary. We have Mrs. Ista and Mrs. Lindsay. We have one of our John Deere partners who was a coach for us and also a father, Sam Wielden. And I'm going to let Mrs. Lindsay and Mrs. Ista introduce the kids when they come up, okay? I just want to thank you for allowing us to join you tonight and tell you a little bit about some of the excitement we're generating in our elementary schools having to do with the 21st century skills. When we think of 21st century skills, we often think of what we're doing in the middle school and the elementary school. We just want to share with you over the next couple minutes some of the things that we're doing in the elementary schools in actually many of our elementary schools. I know we've got some of these things going on in Bennett and Centennial, and also McKinley and Longfellow have contacted us about getting some of the same things going. So we just want to keep this thing going. Mrs. Ista and Mrs. Lindsay came with me last spring to a STEM network conference out in Bismarck. We learned a little bit about this and came back, tried to generate some excitement, and this is what came out of it. I'm going to show you a little bit of a highlight of kind of an ending thing that happened this Saturday, and then from there we're going to bring on the kids and kind of tell you how we got to this point. So I'll turn it over to Kirby.
It just slides.
Lauren Stanford has been playing with Legos since she can remember.
Ever since I've been 6, I've been building Legos, and I've liked building Legos. I get Legos every Christmas.
But today, all those years of playing Legos have finally paid off in a unique competition.
Makes me feel good and proud of my whole team because I know that we can accomplish things as a team.
The first ever Lego League Challenge took place at Kennedy Elementary. Teams of 4th and 5th graders made robots that complete different tasks. The kids have been working on their robots since October to make them a slam dunk, and it all comes down to 2.5 minutes.
When you first think about engineering, maybe it's a little bit intimidating, and you think about all the math that you have to do and physics, and we want to really break it down to show kids that it can be fun.
The competition is designed to teach kids at an early age that even toys can turn into careers.
To boost our confidence and to help us get open minds, to think in any way we can.
The teams were mostly comprised of boys, but there was one team who was in it to win it in ponytails.
You know, a lot of our engineering schools are very high percentage of men, and we'd like to see more girls in there because there's so many girls that are so good at this.
And as the crowd cheers on those victories, it's the kids who are victorious in learning. Sophia Borelli reporting.
Aren't they good? They are stars. Only 14% of engineers are girls. We were lucky we had 2 teams there on Saturday, so 28% of our teams were actually girls. So we think we're getting a good start on that. I'm going to bring up Mrs. Lindsay and Mrs. Ista, and they can kind of bring you up to speed on how we got to this point.
Thank you. We're going to not do a lot of talking because I think the kids could do a lot of talking for us and kind of explain things in a much better way. So I'd like to invite our first group up, the Girls Almighty. And I'd like to introduce Macy Wielden. You can come up. And Lauren Stanford and Cecilia. And they're going to talk to you a little bit about their robot and some of the things that it can do and some of its sensors. So I'll leave it to them.
We chose our robot by trying to figure out what's going to be the most simplest one to make so we can get through more missions. And we chose our missions by trying to get a length of distance away from the base, but still staying close enough that we can get back in time. And some of the missions we did was the door, where we had to push down the lever and open it. And we had to do one where we pushed a lever and it spun, the color spun around in a circle, and then our robot had to pull out the certain color. And then one of the other ones we did was we had to rotate E-looking shape. And we had to spin it so it hit something, and then we had to get back into base.
Any questions?
What's the name of your robot?
We don't have a name.
I have a question. So the experience that you went through building this, does that make you want to do more of this kind of work?
Yeah.
I'm only familiar with one engineering firm, but it happens to have several women engineers, one of whom is one of the leaders of the whole company. So keep going. Those opportunities are out there for you.
Girls, I just also want to tell you good luck. And this is really fun. Little known fact about me is that I am an engineer. And the first day that I went to school, there were 600 men and 1 woman in the room, and that was me. And I hope that when your time comes, that you will be the 3, and there will only, and with 600 women and 1 man. Wouldn't that be a nice change?
One thing that we didn't talk about was how the game actually works. And the fact that this all came in bags and nothing was assembled So it was all of our team's jobs to put the game boards together, our parent volunteers to build the game boards, and then each of the teams, as they bring their robot up, you'll see a little box inside there which is called the brick. And this is what they upload the computer program to. So they have to actually write the code in order to get the motors to do special functions or the sensors. And so what you saw there was hours and hours of code writing and failure and redesign and failure and redesign again, and a couple sleepless nights on our mentors' behalf. And so our coaches have done a really wonderful job, because the trick is that we can't tell them what to do. And as we're learning it with them, and it's so hard not to say, well, what about, let's try this. They have to discover it on their own, and it's really difficult. And even for me as an adult, understanding and learning everything was hard. And for them to be able to do it and be successful on the game board is awesome. But what they have is each one of those pieces on the game board is worth a certain amount of points. And so in 2.5 minutes per competition, they have to see how many points they can accumulate, and whoever accumulates the most points wins. There's also penalties, of course, if a robot breaks or they didn't make it all the way through and they have to pick up their robot and bring it back to base, then they could get a penalty and deducted from their points. So just to give you a little idea of how the game works and what they had to work with. So now I'm going to bring up our Lego Dragon, and we only have one team member, so he is being a brave soul tonight, and he's going to come and talk to you about his robot really quickly. Ethan? Oh, and this is Ethan.
Hi. So our robot, well, the reason we built it was because so we picked our missions because they were the closest. We tried to go for the ones for most points. We found out that that didn't work, and we actually would get less points than we would by just going for things that were closer, because they would be easier to program and build. So one of the reasons we did the door and the other one is because they were close. They had a fair amount of points, and so we were really just going with the closest ones with a fair amount of points. And then we also looked a little deeper into the manual, and we found out that we could build some other stuff to get extra points. So we built some things, and then I'll demonstrate how we push it into a certain square that gives us more points. Wrong program.
if it would reach the circle, then we would earn extra points. And in between rounds, our group actually went and discovered that one of the programs they already wrote would move it to the exact spot that we needed.
Well, we could test it, I guess. It'd be a good time.
Thank you, Ethan. We have our last team, which is the Mad Mindstorm Makers. And Micah is on that team. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about, I was also on this team.
Well, the reason that we built it so big was because that we had a problem with lining the robot up to get through the task. It was off course because we didn't know how to get it positioned and like mark the spots in base for how to exactly go. So we made it big so it could just touch the back walls, which made it easier for us to get the, can't find the words for it. Yeah. Oh, yeah. We also were doing throwing the ball task, so we needed to get it up high so that it wouldn't miss it, because you have to have it from a certain place back, or else it would be easy. Any questions? Mm-hmm.
What Mike is going to attempt to do now with his robot, they get points for throwing the ball, but they also get extra points if the ball stays inside that net. So this is a big skill. They get bonus points for this. So one of the things that we told the kids is failure is okay, and we stress with the kids a lot that, in fact, I opened up the competition by telling the kids, you're all a bunch of failures, and that's okay. That's how our engineers learn what to do. And so the kids, as you learn tonight, I see tonight that they're okay with failure. They know that's part of being a success, and it's one of the things we've been stressing is that you have to be okay with failure. We learn from failure, and that's how we become successful. And so that's been a neat part of it is our kids are comfortable with that, and they just know how to redesign, and if it doesn't work, turn and try something different. So it's really been fun, as you can see, and the kids do a great job. Thanks again for allowing us to be here and for all of your support of elementaries.
Thank you, everybody. That was certainly the highlight of our meeting tonight, I guarantee you. Wow, Linda, did you have a question?
How many of the kids at the school were involved in this? Was this an elective after-school thing? How did this come about?
We had about 30 fourth and fifth graders, and it was evenings, Thursday evening, that they met almost every Thursday evening starting in October. So got going with these guys. And Sam, you had what, four engineer coaches that were parents. They came in every Thursday night, so quite a dedication on the parts of the adults, and they were all volunteers. So quite a dedication to try to generate the excitement. So.
Well, thank you so much. You know what? I was trying to think of what you learned the most of during this whole process, and I would have to say I would have had to learn patience. You guys worked really hard, and you tried again over there. So we look forward to more. Thanks, guys. Okay, our next item on the agenda is recognition of our audience members. There was a sign-up sheet to address the board outside, but we don't want to presume that everybody knows our operating rules. So if anybody would like to address the board that did not sign up, please just give me a nod or raise your hand, and we'll make room for you. Otherwise, we do have one guest that has chosen to present to the board. So when I call you to the podium, Sean, you could state your name and address, and I have to read my little rules thing here. Oops. Here we go. Thank you, Anne Marie. At this time, the board will hear comments from the public. We ask that each speaker who has signed up to address the board state their name and address for the record. We would also ask that speakers refrain from using this forum to criticize or complain about a specific employee by name. The board is interested in your comments and will listen carefully, but is not obligated to respond or debate issues in this forum. Should you desire a written response to a specific question, you may request it. We will limit the speaking time to a maximum of 3 minutes. Sean, would you like to come to the podium?
Hello, I'm Sean Vasicek, 1202 6th Street South, Fargo. And I just wanted to express my concern with the school boundary issue. We moved into our established neighborhood to promote a lifestyle that we wanted to, that we chose. We have to put up with a lot of issues with our old house, and we feel that we're really being penalized for having made this decision many years ago, and now going away from the strong conviction that we had that we lived in a walkable community and in a neighborhood where we knew all the neighbors, and our kids would be encouraged to walk to and from school and have friends in that area. I'm concerned that this does not necessarily, this is not going to support Fargo's long-term vision for the city as being a walkable city and part of the Go 2030. Sorry, I didn't look that up before I came, but I think it's Go 2030 plan. And it's to the extent that it's going to personally for our family be a bit of a hardship, and we may even need to consider exiting the public school system, which is something that I strongly support, but just out of the way that this is going to impact our personal situation, it may drive us to go into the private school system out of some issues that we need to deal with. And then on a lighter note, I'm also an engineer, and I hope that when these students get to school, there's 300 men and 300 women, and they're very diverse.
Thank you, Sean. That item is on the agenda later, so you're welcome to stick around and grab a report if you so choose. Mr. Hanson, it just dawned on me, if you want to remind your students that they can watch themselves over and over again on our public information warehouse, they're going to be famous by the time we get done. Okay, on to staff reports. FEA report, David?
Hello. I'll be heading to Anaheim, California on Friday for the NEA National Leadership Summit. It's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. There'll be 4 individuals from Fargo going and about 20 from the state of North Dakota through North Dakota United. Some of the topics would be to organize, educate, and lead local unions and schools and communities. So looking forward to that. Next week is Read Across America Week, which is sponsored by NEA. And so we're encouraging everybody to get out and read to the students in the schools. To go along with that, we are having our second Gene Week sponsored through FEA. All funds will go towards scholarships for 4 Fargo Public Schools students of $500 each that FEA gives out each year. So we're looking forward to hopefully a good donation of next week for Gene Week, and then we can give out that money to area students. And we're excited for our little spring break starting tonight, and so looking forward to a restful break in the last 3 months of school. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Next agenda item is Brock Leeds, legislative update. Been a little busy, huh?
Madam President, members of the board, yeah, it's crossover is Friday, and so a lot has to get done in the next few days, and a lot has happened since Friday afternoon. So I'll give you a brief update, a little broader than what I sent out to you electronically. I'll start with the weapons bills. There's 3 of them that have had some action in the past few days. House Bill 1157 was a bill that would have had allowed for lawmakers to carry weapons in the Capitol, and that with the same guidelines of having the appropriate certification and concealed weapons permit. That bill did fail on the House floor. As you recall, 1195, which is the House bill that would allow individuals with a concealed and carry permit and appropriate training to carry weapons in school buildings, passed on the House floor. And so those 2 bills, similar but in different public settings, one passed and one failed. And then, as you recall, we talked to our legislators recently about our support for House Bill 1388, which was the bill that would have appropriated dollars to allow small school districts with less than 2,000 students to apply for grants to hire SROs. That bill has come out of appropriations with a do not pass. It did allocate $1,050,000 over the biennium. It allowed for grants of $40,000 the first year, $30,000 the second year. That has received a do not pass from committee, has not hit the House floor yet. But certainly I would suspect that that becomes a question of financial resources, and that's the status of kind of those 3 weapons bills that are out there that we've been following. 1288 has had a lot of action in the past few days. That is the bill that is addressing the ending fund balance for public schools. It was scheduled to be on the floor for debate on Friday. It got moved to Monday because there were some errors in the amendments that were issued by the committee. The committee did amend the bill to, as introduced, it would have restricted ending fund balance to school districts at 10%. The bill was amended in committee and approved in committee to have the limit be 20% or $500,000, whichever is greater. And it also allowed for a longer time period to get that to that threshold. It had to be there by July 1 of 2019. The bill as introduced had to be at 10% by the taxable year ending December 31st of 2015. So we would have, all districts would have had to get to that by the next fiscal year. There were errors in the amendment, so it got held over. Then it got referred back to the Education Committee, and it came back with amendments today, cleaning up all of those errors, and all indications will be that that will be on the House floor tomorrow. So we'll wait and follow that. Typically, once they're on the 6th order and they act on amendments, it is immediately scheduled for the 11th order, which is where the House or Senate floor debate it and take action the next day. So typically that'll happen tomorrow. House Bill 1055, we have not talked a great deal about. We referenced it early on in our conversations. 1055 is the bill that would change the definition of local property tax. So it would remove it from mill levy to cents on the dollar of valuations. So this really becomes an issue or a situation that the county has to deal with, the county auditor, because we certify our budgets through the county. The county takes a look at what we request for mill levy and certifies our budget accordingly. They would need to do the same thing with this, only they would need to apply whatever the appropriate cents on the dollar is. And for all the political subs that are in 1055, they're all different. Not everybody has the same 5 cents on the dollar, 10 cents on the dollar. There's some differences based on levels of tax, I suppose. I don't know all of the particulars. I have talked to Mike Montplaisir in the past. Initially, they were, when the bill was introduced, the county was in opposition to this bill. I don't want to speak for Mike. He and I have not touched base since the initial introduction of the bill. But that did pass the House today, and it passed 65-28, so it passed with a fairly large margin on the House floor, so that will cross over and get to the Senate and have continued conversation. The two early childhood bills that are out there, Senate Bill 2151 and Senate Bill 2254, have both come out of committee. One with a do pass recommendation, one with no recommendation, and they have not been on the Senate floor. Clearly, they will have to be out there in the next day or two, so we'll see. We'll be following those to see the particulars of those two bills. There was an interesting bill, 2165, which was on our docket, that would have placed $5,000 in the interesting part of this bill is, given the nature of the finances in North Dakota and kind of what's been happening lately with oil prices, this bill would have placed $5,000 in the Bank of North Dakota upon the birth of a North Dakota resident where the father and mother were residents of the state of North Dakota. That money then would stay there and be administered through the Bank of North Dakota until that child was college age, and then those dollars were initially intended to help subsidize higher education. If the child did not go to higher education upon reaching 20 years old, they could then use them for business startup loans in the state of North Dakota. And if that was not the path that those individuals took, then the final step was that they would go into a fund for nursing home care. And so everything was kind of tied to education, business startups, and education in the state, business startups in the state, and then long-term care in the state. So that did fail, but an interesting concept on resources statewide and from an education standpoint, of course, continuing to support education. I emailed the board yesterday. Senate Bill 2181 passed the Senate unanimously, 47-0. And 2181 is the bill that would change the reporting relationship of the business manager in school districts. It would put that responsibility directly in the hands of the school board. It would, the way the bill reads, the board would have administrative oversight over all operations of the business manager position. So in a nutshell, the Board of Education would have two direct reporting employees under this bill, the superintendent and the business manager. I did some homework. Nothing in this bill nor in statute specifically talks to the ability to delegate that to the superintendent. So as it sits today, I do not see that language specifically spelled out. I know that was the conversation we had at GAC about how can that be delegated to the superintendent of the district? And in statute currently, it's not there, and this bill does not allow for that as well. But maybe there's other interpretations or amendments could be offered or whatever the case may be. Did you have something on that one, John? The last that I will update you on is actually two more that I would update you on. Senate Bill 2178 is a bill that I testified on earlier in the session, and 2178 would set up a separate allocation appropriation for state loan construction, separate from what's in the K-12 funding bill. And it would also declare an emergency. So what that means is if this bill passes, given that it's been declared an emergency, those funds would be available before the session is over. And so basically, much like the civics, if you remember following the civics bill, it passed the House, it passed the Senate, it got signed by the governor, it's in law currently. Typically, that's not how quickly bills would move. This one, because it is declared an emergency, if it would get acted on, would likely have resources available. The initial bill was introduced where it would put $125 million into this loan fund, and it would be administered through the Bank of North Dakota for the loans. The DPI would have some oversight in how the applications were reviewed and approved, and different than the current state loan construction bill, this would have some priority ranking for how they would determine eligibility. So there's certain things in the bill like rapid growth, deterioration of an existing facility, and age of a facility, things of that nature that would qualify you, not first come, first serve, I guess is what I'm saying. The bill was introduced at $125 million, passed the Senate Education Committee, went to appropriations, and interestingly enough was amended to $250 million. And it passed appropriations and is headed to the Senate floor. And so the thought process there is loans would be eligible to school districts for construction or remodel at a rate no higher than 1%, administered through the Bank of North Dakota. And so that's a big step and a big movement on those funds. As you recall, last session, the dollars that were available through the funding bill, there was more requests than there were dollars available, and the money ran out in very short order. This is a separate allocation from, I believe there's $125 million or $150 million in the funding bill as well for state loan construction. So two separate pools. One that is in the first come, first serve, you apply, you get reviewed. These that are, there's needs now, there's more needs in the hopper than there are dollars currently available. Let's get the dollars available so people can start taking some action. So I really applaud the legislature's efforts here to say, we could have done more, and now that we know we can, we should try to make that available as soon as possible. So stay tuned on that, because that could be something that would directly affect us. The last one, or did you have a question first?
Okay.
The last one I'll touch on is the K-12 funding bill, Senate Bill 2031. We've talked about it before. It also passed the Senate today, 46-0, and so that is headed over to the House. There were some minor amendments in the bill. It did call for some property tax relief of 3%, or 3 mills, each year. 3 mills the first year, 3 mills the second year. There was a slight reduction in the per pupil payment in year one from what was initially introduced, and then there was some very modest adjustments to weighting factors in certain areas, more specifically to the professional development weighting factor, in which they will pay for professional development days, day 3, day 4, day 5. So 2 days are required, and anything you do above that, there's a certain weighting factor, and they adjusted those slightly, but not significantly. So all indications are that's still a very good bill, very favorable for K-12 education, still in the realm of nearly $2 billion for K-12 education. It's pretty monumental as far as the funding that is going out there, and that will cross over now as it got acted on today. So those are the things that have happened literally since Friday afternoon's conference call, and when we were out, just to give you a sense of status, when we were out there last week, the House was about 51% done with their bills. So they needed to get through between 20 and 22 bills a day, every day, to get to crossover. So a lot is happening in the last few days, and between now and Friday, things will be changing daily. With that, I'll try to answer any questions you might have.
John?
Madam President and Brock, this isn't regarding any of those particular bills, but I would like to put our focus on another one. I had a visit today with Senator Carolyn Nelson, former school board member in the Fargo district, who is a prime sponsor of Senate Bill 2279, which is an anti-non-discrimination bill. And it's regarding sexual orientation and folks that are at risk in that regard. I just want to remind us in the Fargo School District that the Fargo School Board, as I recall, passed in about 2010 unanimously a modification of our core policies with regards to treatment of staff and treatment of students, which is not just employment, but it's in every regard. And we were way ahead of the curve in that regard in North Dakota and in comparison to most school districts. This issue prevailed in the Senate by one vote. And after my visit with Senator Nelson today, it seems appropriate to remind us of our history and why our district embarked upon that before others, and why it was the right decision to do so. If anybody has an opportunity to reach out to members of the House, this is a real significant human rights issue, and it's not just students, it's students and families and community. So that's all. I'll just point out that bill is in the balance as well.
Madam President, members of the board, thank you, John, on that 2279 as he referenced. I did forget 2229, Senate Bill 2229, is the Senate bill which removes the requirement of the Fargo Board of Education to have a 9-member board. The bill itself, or the statute as it reads now, allows for school board membership to be 5, 7, or 9 members. And the 9 members is exclusive really to Fargo, and where it specifically says the board, unless otherwise provided by law, the board makeup of Fargo Public Schools shall be 9. So that has been removed and puts the Fargo School Board in the same context as others as far as being able to choose. So I forgot to highlight that as well as one that's a direct impact potentially to this, based on then a process that the citizens can take to reduce the number of board members should they choose.
Just of note, we're not the only district that only has 9. Grand Forks does, and there might be a couple others as well. Okay, Linda?
Does anyone know why Fargo was singled out in statute for that?
Because we existed before statute, and we were 9 from day one.
Okay, David?
Madam Chairman and Brock, on this ending fund balance, what is the penalty if a board chooses to ignore it?
Madam President, members of the board, so a lot of the language was removed from the bill that we discussed when we were out in Bismarck. Some of the concerns that Jim raised about how you pay back, the initial language I think was written not by intention of how you pay back to the citizens, et cetera. What happens now is, as of July 1/19, once the determination is made, DPI will look at it and say, okay, your ending fund balance is X, your ending fund balance is 21%, you're available to have 20% of your general fund, so the difference between the 21 and the 20 is then withheld from your per pupil payment the following year.
Jim?
I'm definitely getting mixed messages on Senate Bill 2181, which should be near and dear to your heart. That's the business manager one. Because this was actually being driven by the State School Board Association. And I'll just read to you the synopsis that I'm getting from the State School Board Exec Director. allow the business manager duties required by law to be delegated upon board approval, and clarify that the school business manager is an employee of the board, and eliminate sections 21-06-05 and 21-06-06. Now, if you would do me a favor, just because I'm traveling the rest of the week, Brock, would you reach out to John Martinson? Make sure he understands, at least I, as a Fargo School Board member, have a concern that we would like the ability to take our responsibility and put it squarely on the shoulders of our superintendent. And I'm under the impression, at least the language that we were working with initially from the State School Board Association would allow for that. But it sounds like that is not how the language or intent is currently in the bill. So I'm guessing John would work with us to try and at least get that latitude available to boards as it's over on the House side. And I'll leave you my notes on this from him, just because then you can put the words right back into his own pen.
Yeah, members of the board, Jim, that would be great. I actually intended to call John today and didn't get an opportunity to do so. And so, yeah, I think if we could make sure that what was intended and what was written, because as we saw with 1218, that didn't happen, and so we need to make sure that the amendments were made appropriately, so that would be great, and I'll get checking on that for you.
Any other reports, Brock?
Nothing else at this time, thank you.
Anne Marie?
Just want to remind board members that before the next board meeting will be our communications audit. The auditor will be here March 9th and 10th. He will be here for the communications committee meeting on March 9th. So if anyone plans to attend that meeting, please RSVP to myself or Betsy so we can have the appropriate number of lunches for that meeting. I also, this last week you were sent the survey for that audit. So if you have not taken part in that survey yet, if you could do so by Friday, that would be great.
Rachel?
Nothing at this time, thank you.
Bob?
Just wanted to give you a quick update that the calendar committee that will be building the 16-17 calendar will be getting together soon. We did put together a survey that we asked our staff and our parents to respond to. That has closed. We had just under 2,700 responses to that survey, and the results of that are available on the Public Information Warehouse. Or if you go to the homepage, there's a scroll of different events in the district, and if you wait long enough, you will see that there's a link to the results.
Thank you. Jeff, you?
My main report will be coming up, so.
Okay. Okay. Okay, rolling along. We have a consent agenda in front of us. Rebecca?
I'd just like to request that the minutes be pulled from the consent agenda for a slight edit under the business section.
Okay. Would you like to make a motion with pulling that item?
I could make a motion to pull that.
Sure.
If I need to. I would like to make a motion that the minutes be pulled from the consent agenda for an edit in the business section.
I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda with the exception of the minutes, please vote by saying yes. Yes. Any opposed, no. Okay, we will put the minutes there under our business items under 7D. It is 6:20. The next item on the agenda might take some time. What are the wishes of the board? Jim?
My wish is to move adoption of the consent agenda with the removal of the minutes. So I so move that.
Okay. Any other discussion items? Okay, I'm sorry, I thought we just approved this. Oh, gotcha. Okay. Okay. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda with the exception of the minutes, please vote by saying yes.
Yes. Yes.
Any opposed, no. Okay, now we have an approved consent agenda. Okay, wishes of the board. Do you want to do a break, Linda?
Rather than putting the minutes at the end of business, I would suggest putting the minutes now, getting it out of the way, and then
Okay.
maybe that'll bring us up to break.
Okay. Rebecca, would you like to talk about the minute correction?
Sure. It's in regard to the Fargo Dome Authority nominees. And in the second sentence, I'm suggesting that the language that says, quote, voted for 2 nominees, unquote, be striked and be replaced with, quote, was able to vote for 2 nominees. So that sentence would read, quote, on a paper ballot, each board member was able to vote for 2 nominees, unquote.
Linda?
Is that because we have the option of voting for 1 or 2? Or what, can you explain that a little bit?
I believe that it was reported that not every member voted for 2.
Paul?
But we did have the option of voting for 1 or 2.
Rebecca has a motion on the floor.
I don't know, did I make a formal motion? Maybe I,
To strike
okay.
and add. Right. But we also need a second in order to bring it to the floor.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay. All those in favor of approving the amended minutes as previously stated, please vote by saying yes.
Yes.
Any opposed, no. All right, thank you. With that, we can take a break until 6:30, and we will come back and talk about our boundary adjustments. Thank you. Okay. We will move on to our next agenda item. Dr. Schatz is going to talk about the Boundary Adjustments Implementation Plan.
Okay, thank you. What we're going to do tonight is Bob and I are going to team this and outline what we were asked to bring back to you, and that was a lot of information about if we were to make some boundary adjustments to the middle school, high school boundaries. And so you've seen the report. Hopefully you've had a chance to go through and read it. This report was created with the input of a lot of different people. We had our principals involved, we had our directors involved with the different departments. Cabinet was involved, so there were a number of different folks who had input on this in a lot of the different areas. As you can see in the summary statement on page 1, what we're bringing to you is a boundary adjustment that you've seen before. That boundary adjustment would make some adjustments to the attendance areas for the middle and high school kids. In particular, moving kids from the Main Avenue corridor down to Fifth Avenue over to University down to 13th Avenue. In particular, that group of kids north to help us balance our attendance areas with Fargo North and with Ben Franklin, where we have space for that. This also addresses the issue of growth to the south in helping us to manage that growth in the future as we anticipate a lot of growth and the impact on Discovery and on Davies. And so we tried to go through and consider all the different types of questions that might be asked and some of the things that people have been concerned about in the past, things we heard last spring, things that we heard this fall. And so in the report, hopefully we've addressed a lot of those things. So to get us started, I'm going to have Bob first refresh everybody's memory with the data and the information and the boundaries and the adjustments and where they all are. And we're just going to kind of team this. So I might be jumping in at certain times. And so that's how we're going to do it. So, Bob?
Wonderful. Well, thank you. As we look at the data, right now I'm referring to page 2 in your packet. This is just a map of the current middle school boundary attendance areas, where you see Ben Franklin, Carl Ben Allison, and then Discovery. Near the bottom of page 2, for your reference, and as we talk through this together, this is the current students that were enrolled in those 3 facilities on January 1st of this year. We are using January 1st because that is the same date or the same point in time in which we shared data with you the last time. We just wanted that to be consistent. And as we go through different pieces of information, we're using that same date as the poll so that it's consistent from graph to chart and so on. But what you'll see then on January 1st, Ben Franklin at 672, Carl Ben Allison 806, and Discovery 903 students. On page 3 then, what this shows is the proposed boundaries in which Dr. Schatz was just describing the changes. And then on the bottom of that page, what you will see is the impact of those changes. One thing that we needed to do is when we created the boundary changes, the first thing is, because we do have some students on a petition going to a different school, we first, in the piece of software, sent all the students back to their home school and then ran the data on the new boundaries. Just because as we move forward, we will never know if we'll have the same percentage of students petitioning from one area to the next, and we just wanted the data as clean as possible. So based on that, you can see the impact of that boundary change at the 3 middle schools. The column in gray just refers back to the last data set so that you can see the existing numbers at those 3 sites and then the impact that this proposed boundary would have. The next 2 pages do the same thing for the high school. So as we take a look at page 4, you will see the existing high school boundaries. And on the bottom of then page 4, the number of students attending each of our high schools as of January 1st. As you look at this data set to the data that's on page 5, the impact of the proposed boundaries, you will notice that on the bottom, the number of students attending Woodrow Wilson does not change because that we kept constant, because that is dependent upon that choice that's being made. The other data is done the same way as the middle school. We first sent all the students back to their home school, then ran the data set based on the new boundaries. And you can see the gray column is the data that was referred to on the previous page, and then the next column to the right would be the impact of these proposed boundary changes. As you look at that, what's on the bottom of page 5, from a high school perspective, you can see what these boundary changes would do in balancing at our 3 comprehensive high schools. That is based on the assumption that every student would change under the new boundary scenario, but that's not what the recommendation is based on, and we'll talk about the roll-in plan as we get further into the packet. Moving forward, we wanted to provide you some data to base your conversations about on the sustainability or the long-term impacts of the boundary. So on page 6, what you'll see are 2 different data sets. The one near the top is data from our demographer, RSP, in which they looked at the current boundaries and made a projection for the next 5 years on the number of students who would be served at the full report looks at all of our buildings, but on this page, you'll see for Ben Franklin and North High School. And again, this is based on their information as we move forward to 15-16 and all the way out to 19-20. That's as far as their report went. And that's why for the last 2 columns, you will see that there is not data provided. But that's based on current boundaries and their projection moving forward. Below that is another set of data that we tried to provide you what this would look like in the future based on the new boundaries. And to help me present that, I'm just going to switch very quickly to this. What we did with the information is wanted to provide for you a cohort model on what would happen over the next few years based on the students who are currently elementary-aged students. So to do that, on page 6, you see that this data. On page 9, unfortunately, is the explanation of how we got there. What we did is, and what you'll see on this page, on page 9, there are really 3 sets or rows. The first row of data, that is the current elementary age students who reside in the existing boundaries for Ben Franklin and North High School. So that is current boundaries. So you can see under that, there would be 1,375 elementary aged students currently in the existing North and Ben Franklin boundaries. Then what we did is we went into the proposed boundary change, and you'll see below there's a map with a section A. That is the area that is being suggested that would move from Carl Ben Eielson and South High School to Ben Franklin and North High School. And within that area, there are 285 kindergarten through 5th grade students. And then to the right, you can see by grade level where those students are. The last set of data then combines those 2. So this would be under the new boundaries for Ben Franklin and North. How many students are there that are of elementary age? And in this case, there'd be 1,660. And then you can see the corresponding number of 5th graders, 4th graders, 3rd graders, and so on. Wanted to provide for you the context of how that data was achieved. That brings us back to page 6, in which we used that information to develop this cohort model. So on page 6, the left-hand columns show current students this year under the new new secondary boundaries, kindergarten through 5th grade. The next column then moves that group forward 1 year, where this year's kindergartners become next year's first graders, and so on. And then continued that forward to 2016-17 and 17-18. And that's where I wanted to stop, because it's in 2017-18, it's the first time that our current elementary age students would be middle school age in grades 6, 7, and 8. So we could see how many students there would be at the middle school. So based on this data, this year's third graders in 2017-18 would be sixth graders. This year's fourth graders would be seventh, and so on. So based on that, in 17-18, we would have approximately 811 middle school students at Ben Franklin. This is based on no mobility. And we know that we have students who move in and out of the district, but not trying to make the assumption on what that would be. This just moves this cohort group forward into the future. And then we did the same for 18-19 and the next 2 years. And then finally, when you get to that last column, that's when this year's elementary age students would be at the high school. So this year's second graders would be freshmen in 21, 22, and so on. The reason we provided this data is so that you could compare the difference between what's on the top of the screen, on the top of that page, the projection from RSP, to the bottom of the page of what this would mean if this cohort moved through the system under the new boundaries, both at the middle school, and then when we look at that last column, because RSP did not project out that far, we may need to look at the 1920 data, but at least that gives us some comparison between if we continued under the existing boundaries to what happens if we implement the new boundaries. Then, the next 2 pages of your document provide you the same data for the next 2 buildings. So as you look at page 7, you'll see the same information from RSP and the projection moving forward for Carl Ben Eielson and South High School. And on page 8, you will see the same projection as we look at Discovery and Davies, moving that forward. I'm going to skip past pages 9, 10, and 11 because that was where that data was determined, but I wanted to provide that for you so you could see the impact of those different areas. But that's where all that information comes from. But wanted to talk a little bit about what's found on page 12 as we talk about what the recommendation for a phase-in model would be. And that would be that we would suggest that if these boundaries were put in place for the 2016-17 school year, that for those students who would be 6th graders or 7th graders that year, they would attend their middle school based on the new boundaries. 8th graders that year would remain at their existing middle school so that they could continue their middle school career through all 3 years at the middle school. And since 7th grade students would be impacted, what we would suggest is that we would inform parents at the end of this year that your student, when they would become a 7th grader, may have to change middle school. So we're going to suggest that and give you the option of making that decision 1 year early. So that next school year, that student could begin at their new middle school and then over the course of the next 3 years, be at that same middle school for the next 3 years. At the high school level, what we are suggesting is a roll-in plan that would begin with 9th grade students in 2016. Those who then would be 10th, 11th, and 12th graders would remain at their high school and continue their career through the end of their senior year. And then in 17-18, it would be 9th and 10th. The next year would be 9, 10, 11. And finally in 19-20, that's when all high school students would be impacted by these new boundary changes. When I met with the secondary principals, this was their recommendation as a group, because what they wanted to do is make sure that those students who started at a middle school and were there for 2 years could finish at that middle school. They wanted to make sure that a student who entered or is already at a high school could finish at that high school, and that we come up with a role and plan. And that was a group consensus and supported by 100% of the secondary principals. Finally, the last thing that we talked about is what's found on page 14 would be how might we suggest that we handle a grandfathering or a petitioning process. And again, with the secondary principals, we talked through this together, and it would be their recommendation and ours that we try our very best to allow families to stay together within the secondary school setting. So what we would suggest is that we would modify our petition process, and that's what's found on page 14, that really would have 3 for sure yeses to the petition process. 1, and that's that first bullet, if a student had an older sibling who was currently attending a high school and I wanted to attend that high school as well, the answer would be yes, so the families could stay together. The second would be if the student had an older sibling attending a middle school and I wanted to attend that middle school, the answer would be yes, so those families would stay together. And finally, the third bullet is if there was a student who had an older sibling attending a high school, a petition would be approved to that corresponding feeder middle school so that those families could stay together as we move through this process. And that then would be articulated in the petition process on step C, where we would ask families just to say, which schools are you requesting, those groupings of 2, and then in section K, the reason why, because my child has a sibling who will attend. And then there's that asterisk that says that qualifying families, their petitions would be approved as we move forward. So I think as we worked through this together as a group of principals to develop the recommendation, we wanted to make sure that it was a smooth transition, one that we would phase in, one that would get the results that we wanted, and one that in which we could modify our petition process to be very receptive to families wanting to stay together within those schools.
One of the things I wanted to point out, Bob, if you could go back to the Carl Ben Eielson South scenario with the data with RSP. As you look at the RSP data, which is our current attendance area, you can see the numbers at Carl Ben Eielson. When we get out to 2019-20, they're up to 1,000 students. So if we did nothing and kept with what we have, they're up to 1,000 students. The school's not built to handle that. So we're at capacity there. So we also have issues there. If you look at down here, where then we adjust it with the attendance area, and we take the numbers of students we had, and that remains constant as they work their way through, not including any kind of student mobility, because we just don't have that, you can see how that adjusted. And so that gives us more time to work with the growth that's going to occur on the far south, but also potentially what might have to happen way down the road when Davies and Discovery fill again. Because the whole idea here is to create some space there for the growth and then also balance the numbers in the middle and in the far north. But eventually this will become an issue for the district. Because if Davies and Discovery fill way down the road, get to 2021, 21, 22, you're going to have to make a decision. What are you going to do now? Because if we go with this plan, you can't move anybody further north anymore. This is it. I know that's been a question, is this it? Well, if you go to 5th Avenue over to University, down to 13th and over, that's about what you can take north. There isn't anything else to really do. And so that will be, and I'm just pointing that out for way down the road. It's going to be a major decision for the district, and they're going to have to consider what they're doing. either additions on the buildings, additional buildings, whatever that might be. But that, and with our growth projections right now, if they come true, this could accelerate. Okay, so.
What kind of capacity does Carl Ben have for building addition? That factored in, would we have to go vertically, do you know?
And that would be very difficult if I were to just answer that without doing much research because of just the space that's there. Not a piece of land where you can do a lot of additions to, and the way the school's built too, I think that would be anything's possible, but would be really challenging. Yeah. And the challenge that you have is that you can backfill into South, because South at one time was 1,400, 1,500, but you can't backfill the middle school because they don't have the space. So there's an imbalance there. That's your challenge. Okay, so I just wanted to make that comment. Maybe since we're at this point of these numbers, if there's any questions or clarifications, we could do that, and then I can move through the rest of the report. Is there any question at this point?
You said the max for Carl Ben is about 1,000.
That would be pushing it pretty hard, yeah.
What was Discovery built to hold?
Discovery's an interesting school because when it was originally built, it was built as an 8-9 school, and it was built at that time to be a different setup than what it's being used for now. And so originally they were saying 1,200 students. Well, now that you have a middle school concept, and with, again, we talk about these ancillary programs and all the other things we do in our schools today, I don't know if that's a realistic number, because right now I would tell you that at their population they have currently, they don't have enough music room space. Their lunchroom commons area is too small. It's very crowded. They have some other issues down within their physical education area, meeting the needs and the demands of extracurricular programs, those types of things. So if you were to fill Discovery up to 1,200 students, you would be jam-packing that school with the middle school concept. It would be very difficult to do the things that you need to do. So that's the challenge moving forward. So how do we get some relief to Discovery, to Davies? Davies is the same way. Davies is built to maximum of 1,350, but there's only 1,285 lockers, for example. You start getting to 1,285, 1,290, almost to 1,300, now you're starting to really pack the facility for what it was built. You get to 1,350, you are packed. You get over that, now you're all over the place. And so that would be the challenge.
So for Discovery, would 1,000 or 1,050 be a more realistic number?
If you get to that number, they would be full. I think that you, just like our long-range facility plan has stated before, there is a need to do probably some modifications there, minor adjustments to the facility, another music room, some adjustments down in the physical education area, possibly pulling out that commons area. There's plenty of space to do that with the way they had originally built it. Probably a 1.5 to 2 million type project, and that's just throwing that out there. So if you got up to 1,050, you'd want to probably look at doing that to that facility, some of those minor adjustments. But that, right now, in our list of things to do with our long-range facility plan, that's down the road, okay? But it is listed in there.
I want to go back to Linda's question about, was CBE designed for an addition? I don't believe so, because at the time, we viewed it as an infill school in a stabilized area. That being said, Discovery was built so we could put an addition on it, and Davies was built and designed so an addition could go on it and structurally maintain its integrity. That being said, I'm sure there's a way to put an addition on CBE, but it was not part of the original construction concept.
I would also refer us to our guiding principles for ideal numbers in a middle and high school, and trying to stay away from those supersized schools. We can add on, but how big do we want the schools to get? It would be the question we need to ask ourselves. Paul?
In listening to the report and in reviewing it before tonight's meeting, I was impressed with the detail and the thought and the planning that goes into it. And I know we get criticized by the public from time to time because we're moving boundaries and we're changing locations where students are going to be going to schools, and they're going to have different mascots, and their friends are going to be at different schools. And it occurred to me that instead of calling this a boundary change program, it would be neat, unfortunately it won't happen, but it would be nice if somehow it could be referred to instead perhaps as a student opportunity enhancement program, because what really underlies all of these boundary changes, it seems to me, is not just a boundary change and moving kids around like assets. It really, the purpose of it is to allow for more opportunities for the students. You'll notice that when Dr. Schatz talked about why Discovery might need additional enhancement, or some of the other buildings might need additional enhancement, it's because they needed more music rooms or more phy-ed rooms or more other opportunities for students. And that's, I wish there was a way we could somehow let the public understand that phraseology and that concept that underlies what's going on here.
John?
Madam President, members of the board, I'm really a visual learner sometimes, and sometimes need to see things and reconcile things. I know in the years I've been on the board, and whenever there have been discussions about any boundary changes, it usually creates an immense response. And this particular proposal, I've seen one letter which was actually supportive of it entirely, and very positive about going north to Fargo North from the vicinity of 13th Avenue South. But if somebody could help me understand Mr. Bosacek's, just his information so I get it clearly. I think I'm hearing that issue is a walkability issue to Carl Ben, and maybe I'm guessing not as much to South. If I'm hearing it, so I just visualize, and I'm curious what kind of feedback, if we've had others, or how much feedback that might reflect this question of walkability and concerns for neighborhoods, just so we've addressed that.
Well, I would say over the last year, that's always the conversation as to what's walkability. I mean, that's become kind of the term. I mean, I think Doug's kind of brought that to our table, Doug Burgum. With the whole idea of infill walkability. We're doing that. With Ed Clapp School, we got over 250 students that'll be attending that school that are going to live within a 2 to 3 block area. So we're taking care of that. Tonight, you're going to be talking about the Eagles Center. What are we going to do with that? If we were to move forward with that, you would put a lot of students into that walkability corridor. We have talked about our elementary schools, walkability being an important part. Once you get to middle school, high school, it changes the game significantly. I could tell you that the kids in the Washington attendance area don't have walkability that are up north of County 20. I could tell you that the kids that currently live in the Bluemont area that go to Kennedy have never had walkability. So we are doing our best to put that onto the map with elementary. But when it gets to secondary, it's very difficult to do. And so to answer your question, I think that we're trying to do that at the elementary, but at the middle school, high school, it's pretty difficult.
And secondly, I'd like to thank you for bringing in the topic following about the discussion to do an addition to what's currently the Eagles Center. And as I'm hearing that, Dr. Schatz, you're anticipating that in the flows for feeder systems in this proposal as well?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
Any other questions on the numbers piece?
Do these numbers reflect the petition effect as well as the roll-in effect?
I'll let Bob answer that.
The numbers that I shared with you, just like what I stated earlier, we first said all petitions we're going to send back to their home schools. Again, not knowing that a year down the road, 5 years down the road, we'll have the same percentage of families petitioning. So this is based on where families reside and the number that of students in those catchment areas.
So then do we have a way of knowing, I mean, these are based on where they are currently, but how far off could we be based on how long it takes us to implement and how many families actually do have siblings that are already at the school and already at the school? Do you see what I'm saying?
The middle school plan, once we begin, would be fully implemented in 2 years, because we are suggesting that the first year we do 2 of the 3 grade levels, the second would be the third. The high school plan would take us a little bit longer because it's a 1 year or 1 grade per year phase in. So we would see approximately 1/4 of the benefit moving forward each of those years. How many students may have siblings at one of the other buildings? That's a little bit more difficult to answer. But what I can say is if we look at the map that's on the board, in the area south of Main Avenue, so the area that is in brown, there would be approximately 44 current fourth grade students. So if that gives you a perspective on how many students per grade level that we're talking about, I could not tell you how many of those have an older sibling at a high school right now, but we're talking about 44 students per grade level.
Madam President and members of the board, just one last question for, I'm guessing, Dr. Gross. With regard to the section on grandfathering and petitioning, what I think I heard you say was these were 3 for sure yeses, which leads me to ask, well, what would be potentially possible yeses?
As we look at our petition process from kindergarten through the high school, at the elementary level, we need to make sure that when we approve a petition that it actually improves the class size in both, or does not push us over a certain class size limit in one and under in another building. That's a little bit more difficult at the elementary due to the fewer number of sections that we might have per building. At the secondary, petitions are a little bit easier because you have more sections of 6th grade math, more sections of 6th grade language arts to accept new students. But again, what we'd want to do is make sure that the final outcome of this, trying to equalize as much as possible the number of students in each of our buildings, is achieved through that process. So that's where we might look at a petition a little bit more carefully.
Also add that there's 2 other things that I can think of. If you had a student who had significant special education needs and significant situation there, sometimes moving a student is really difficult, changing the environment. So if a parent were in that situation, they certainly could come forward with a petition to stay where they're at, have the principal, special education team take a look at that and see if that would be best for that student to stay in the school. The second thing is something that in the report we allude to, and that is in our co-curricular programs, extracurricular programs, we do have some kids that have participated on varsity teams, but they're middle school students. And so if they are already aligned with that team, even though they don't declare their official eligibility till they're in 9th grade, we may have to make some accommodations there to allow that to happen. And we did the same thing when we opened Davies in South. We did, Dr. Birch and I looked at that, and we let some kids stay at South on the hockey team, for example, rather than going to Davies, that type of stuff. And then that works its way out of the system eventually. So there will be those unique situations where it would make good sense to consider that petition. But if it's for just general things that, I just want to go there, I want to, do some of those things, we may have to say no because we have to keep the balance of the numbers. And especially at the elementary level, that's really critical.
And if I might continue just one more moment, you're not saying that nobody can ask and request a petitioning process. That's not being excluded here at all, is it? And then you weigh the different data and information into the decision.
We would continue with our existing petition process, which families have that opportunity year after year.
Thank you.
Next part of the report, please.
Well, I was just going to say also that what we're trying to do with this is to maximize a system that would be user-friendly to families, to try not to break up families, and really giving the options back to the families to make those decisions. If you want a petition for a younger sibling to stay aligned with an older sibling, your option's there. One of the questions that's come forward to me is that, well, why 13th Avenue? Why split CB neighborhood? Because it goes all the way to the interstate. Well, if you live between 13th and the interstate and you want to petition north, you can do that right now. And there would be no reason for us to deny that because there's this space. And so the principals are well aware of that. The Ben Franklin, Fargo North administrative teams would look at that and say, yeah, I mean, let's do that if it's possible. So I think what we're trying to do is give people options, but yet still achieve an end game, and that is to balance these enrollments, and that'll be the tricky part. Okay, I'll move forward and just try to explain a few more pieces and parts to the puzzle that we tried to answer, and then we can take more questions if you have them. As we move on, there's several more sections of the report where I went to the departments and I said, okay, what would the impact be and how much of an impact? Well, the first question is going to be split elementary schools. That's something Fargo hasn't really had before. We knew that when we put EdClap onto the bank of schools that we have here and put them on the map, that they would be a split school, that their attendance area would split between Discovery and Carl Ben Eielson. We already knew that, so that's the first split elementary school. But by doing what we're going to do now, we would also be splitting Jefferson and we'd be splitting the Carl Ben neighborhood elementary schools with regard to where their feeder middle school would be. And we can talk also about Eagles down the road. If we end up doing that, there might be some implications there. So we know that moving forward, that will be the reality, that we are asking those elementary schools to attend two different feeders. Not unusual in the education business for that to happen. Fargo's been lucky not to be had to do that. But as you continue to grow, it gets harder and harder not to do that. And so the beauty of this is that we don't have to split middle schools yet. There's a lot of cities that split middle schools where they go to two different high schools. And so in a very long-range look, I don't see the need to do that with this type of plan. So it would really solidify that. Course offerings, we've talked about course offerings before. One of the things that I want to make clear is that at Fargo North, for example, where they're at about 950 students, you saw the projections that if we do nothing, they're looking to go to 853 in 5 years. I've said this before, that when you get below 900 students, that's when trouble starts to happen with being able to offer sections of AP courses and some of the other types of courses where you end up with what we call singletons. They're not in danger of that right now, but by doing what we're doing, we would stabilize those course offerings and possibly then get away from so many traveling teachers. Most of you haven't built a master schedule, but when you build a master schedule, we talk about FTEs and we talk about departments. So let's take an English department, for example. If you have an English department that has so many sections where you need 9.4 FTEs, that means you need 9 full-time teachers and a 0.4 teacher. That's 2 sections. They still have 3 sections they need to teach. So you fill that traveling teacher at North and then 3 sections somewhere else. And so they're a traveling teacher. The higher your numbers get, and when you get over that 950 to 1,000, you start filling those schedules. So now you might have a 10-point FTE need versus a 9.4. So you have and you make that adjustment throughout the system. So you typically end up with less traveling teachers. So that would be a real plus by doing what we're doing. So when it comes to course offerings, it's not so much that we're enhancing more opportunities, it's we're ensuring opportunities and we're making sure that they're stable. And then also to get the teachers that don't have to travel anymore would really be a bonus. Because I can tell you, coming to this district 6 years ago, we have a lot of traveling teachers, a lot. And it's because of the imbalances. And so hopefully we can stabilize that with this. Teacher transfer assignment, that would happen naturally through the roll-in. And we've done that for years. Where there's needs, then we move teachers, and there's, the principals work it out, and they work it out with the teachers. So we don't see any significant issues with that. I asked Bonnie, what's the impact of ELL programming? We would have more students on the north side that would need some services. She outlined there that she would have a plan in place. It would be pretty minor adjustments in order to meet those needs, all within our current structure and current staffing, so we don't anticipate any major changes there. Same thing with special education. Again, it's about staffing and making sure that they looked at who the students might be and about how many students. No major shifts there that we're concerned about. We could easily accommodate any kind of shift with wherever students would end up. In the extracurricular realm, same thing. Todd Olson looked at that. There might have to be some coaching shifts to accommodate some numbers, but the numbers are moving within the system. So it's not like we're adding a whole bunch more. It might create some more opportunities for kids in certain places where there's been large numbers and now we're balancing those numbers. So it might increase some of that. It's the eligibility issue that we have to be careful with, and it's what I talked about earlier, aligning the middle school student who's maybe been on the varsity team and allowing them to continue, that kind of thing.
I have a question on that. So provisions will have to be made. History, does that show that NDHSAA, do they work with districts through those transition periods for eligibility?
We would still be following their policies and their rules by doing that.
Okay.
Okay, but
So
what
what if a student did change schools, they couldn't change the sports team?
Once they declare the eligibility at ninth grade, then they have to sit the 180 days. So what we have to make sure that happens is if they've been on that varsity team in their middle school years, which is a handful of students, that we make sure we declare their eligibility at the school where they're going to compete. So in other words, they get a petition, they're attending that school. Okay? That way we don't lose the eligibility issue for the student. That's the other reason for the ninth grade roll-in. So we're not messing with any student who's participating. And this goes with all sorts of programs beyond athletics that the High School Activity Association oversees. And so we want to make sure we keep that intact. In the area of technology, actually, when you read through the report, there's some things that might even be better for us as far as balancing some of the things that we do with some of the staffing that we have. Overall, with our one-to-one initiative, that pretty much moves with students, so we don't see a major impact in that area. If you go on to transportation, we had Chris Pinkney, our transportation coordinator, take a hard look at all the routes. Obviously, if we're moving more students north, some of our routes would be a little bit more extended. There would be some additional costs to that. We've outlined that there, about 60 to 75,000 out of a $4-point-something million budget. This is the type of an adjustment that might happen each year, just depending on where routes are. So not a major impact with that. We feel that with the arterial routes that go north and with the 10th Street and some of the other routes that this should not be a problem. When you look around our city and you look at some of the other school areas and impact areas of routes, especially in some of the neighborhood areas, it's much more difficult to get around and to move around the city. So we feel okay there. Nutrition services, again, just a shifting of staffing. Probably more importantly is the feedback communications plan. We will be ready if you give us the go-ahead to launch a spot on a web page for people to give feedback and to take a look at the full report. Right now, Anne Marie had indicated on there March 2nd until March 19th. If we're ready to go after tonight, I think we could get it launched before the end of the week. We also have scheduled 3 opportunities for us to present this plan. One at Clara Barton, one at Jefferson, and one at Centennial. We tried to go to the neighborhoods that are mostly impacted, where we could present the plan, provide opportunity for clarification, questions, those types of things. And you can see those are outlined there also. And then if a plan eventually is approved, we would use all of our usual communication modes to make sure that people knew exactly what was going on with that move. So we tried to hit all the areas that would cover most of the questions. If there's additional questions you have at this time, we would be more than happy to answer those. I guess what we're basically asking you tonight is to give us the go-ahead to initiate those public input forums, opportunity for people to learn more about the plan, to ask questions, for us to gather that information, bring it back to you with hopefully your decision sometime late March as to whether you want to move forward with an adjustment to boundaries. So,
Jennifer?
In terms of the modified transportation discussion, if families were scheduled, so if they have a 5th grader originally going to CBE, but through this plan would transition to Ben, you mentioned having the option to move earlier rather than having to wait till 7th grade. How will there be transportation offered for those families?
I talked to Brock and I've talked to Bob about this. Our current plan right now is that when people petition, we don't provide transportation. However, we're going to have to monitor that, because if we get a lot of people who say, I want to petition, and we can run a route through there, we'll certainly take a hard look at that and probably try to provide that.
Jim and Rebecca.
I just want to get it on the table. I'm going to make a motion that we preliminarily approve the secondary boundary changes as identified in memo number 89 to be implemented in school year 2016-17, and have this item brought back to the board no earlier than March 24th for our final consideration.
Second. Okay. Jim?
I know this is happening, but I just want to make sure it's on all of our notes on this. Assuming we were to implement this at a future school board meeting date, I'm guessing we are going to be reaching out to the Park District, to all the different organized youth activity programs throughout our community, and making sure they know the new map. Because kids are getting involved, in my opinion, at way too young of an age in these things, but they are getting involved. And quite frankly, they're set up to be feeder programs into our high schools right now. So hopefully they've been paying attention to our conversation. I know our district reaches out to these people already. I just want to make sure we have that on our notepad of to do if this indeed ends up being what we decide as a board to do.
Rebecca, I'm sorry, did you respond?
Well, I was just going to respond to that. I already saw one annual report that comes out for youth hockey, and they are already talking about the potential boundary changes and, you know, some of the things they've talked about with how they plan for youth hockey, and saying in there, you know, contingent upon any boundary. So I know that there are groups out there already watching what's happening, so.
Rebecca?
Okay, well, I have a few comments here, and I'm going to read them because they're about a conversation that I had with a person by the name of Mike, who lives in the Claire Barton Hawthorne neighborhood, and I think all board members received an email from him, but I responded to him late last night, and we met for coffee early this morning. And he wanted to learn, you know, more in depth about this implementation plan, and at first, I think he and a couple of others that had contacted me thought that the final decision was going to be made tonight, but I explained that there are opportunities for, you know, some input and some feedback and still some discussion, and so that has been well received. And I wanted to learn also, you know, some of his top concerns and thoughts. So basically, it seemed like there were two overarching themes that, and I think that they have been addressed, at least with the research and the plan. And he is an active parent, and he's a coach for his kids in sports, and so he talks to, you know, the parents in the neighborhood. And his kids, I think they both attend Hawthorne. But, so two of the comments. One, tell us how long we're looking out for this plan, you know, or is this like some willy-nilly thing where in 2 years we're going to make another change? Because we don't want to have to deal with that. So whatever the change is going to be, give us an idea as far as how long we're looking out, and then at least we can plan around that. And so this does that. It takes us for sure into the 2021 school year. And so we have the vision until that time to I think, give to the public, give to the community that's where we're planning out towards. And then also he was very interested in, and I think he shared this in the email about options for flexibility. And I further explained to him our petitioning process. And because one of his main questions was, well, why don't we just go all the way to the interstate in that Claire Barton area? And after receiving a little bit more information in regard to how our petitioning process goes, he was more comfortable with that. I think really he would like us to say that the official boundary does go all the way down to the interstate, but also understanding that it's workable. We can do this 13th Avenue deal, and it's not going to be the end of the world, and our kids and our families will adapt. And personally, coming from the Claire Barton Hawthorne neighborhood, this is something that affects my family, but I can also see that, you know, we need to look to the greater good. And one of a phrase that he used when I visited with him, which I thought was great, was he said, let's build a strong city. And, strong cities, he said, have strong schools. And so what do we need to do to help build strong schools for the city of Fargo and take an umbrella, look at this versus just, this is where I live in this neighborhood. And obviously, individual neighborhoods build strong schools and strong cities, but also looking at it from an umbrella approach. So it was just, it was enlightening to have that kind of a conversation with a constituent, I would say, and obviously someone that's very concerned about the city of Fargo and the quality of the school district. So I'm eager to hear what kind of feedback we get between now and March 24th, but we might have some more items. You know, there's a long list of there were 15 or 16 items that are addressed in this report, and it could be that there are some that we still need to address, and I'm sure we'll do that as we move forward. But I'm comfortable with the information that's presented, so thank you very much for all the work.
Thank you, Rebecca. I caution us to make any promises that this is firm until 2021, because I would say barring any unforeseen circumstances would probably be a little bit safer. I too have had feedback from parents, with the exception of this board meeting, that were very supportive. They were talking about transitioning a year early, and their main questions were transportation as well. And I kind of bounced that off of Jeff. Any other comments to the motion on the floor? Or, go ahead.
Madam President, members of the board, I'm just relieved that we parsed this out and dealt with elementary boundaries individually, separately first, because that was really muddled back when, and to have addressed that first and now to go to secondary boundaries, it's so much easier to get our arms around. And, you know, I just don't know if there's any districts out there that are going to have this type of a discussion, which is so emotional for people, with so little trauma. I need to commend our administration for doing everything you can in every regard to take every concern into this planning process. And of course, not everybody is going to be always happy, but as Rebecca said, the greater public good. And I remember one time years ago, somebody told me when we were going into a boundary discussion, said, you better get your flak jacket on. And you know, and I was, and we've really approached this in a fashion where I think we're all landing on the same page, and we're going the same direction, and it's for a stronger city. So I thank you to our administration and staff for taking the time, for doing it right, and for still going forward to engage the public again, to make sure one more time that we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's.
Okay. Seeing no more hands, we do have a motion on the floor. Sure we're done? Okay. Anne Marie?
Goldenberg. Yes. Johnson.
Yes.
Knutson.
Yes.
Myers.
Yes.
Paulson.
Yes.
Strand.
Yes.
Benson.
Yes.
Boyd.
Yes.
Nelson.
Yes, motion carries. Jim, how much time do you think you'll need for the next section?
Less than 2 hours.
Okay. With that, let's go ahead and tackle that now? Let's do it.
It's your call.
Okay, let's do it.
I'd reference you to memo number 91 in your packet. Planning met and sat down with our administration to look at a number of our long-range facility planning issues, but we are bringing a recommendation from planning today for board action on one of them that we believe is very, very time-sensitive. I believe at an earlier board meeting, we had discussion about the possibility of putting an addition on to one of our buildings, and in particular, the Eagles Center out on South University, and turning that into a mid-size elementary K through 5 building. Based on our current enrollment projections in South Fargo, the original thinking was that we probably were going to have a need for that building either in 2017 or possibly earlier. Due to a number of financial factors, including the demographic issues, Planning is recommending that we authorize our administration to begin the process now of putting on an addition to the Eagles Center so that it could be opened in the fall of 2016 at a cost of up to $9 million. And before I enter that in as our official motion from myself representing Planning Committee, I want to make sure you understand what's motivating from planning's perspective the movement from 2016 to 2017. Absent doing this, we immediately have population explosion issues going on. Well, actually, they're happening right now at Lincoln, but they just get worse. We are probably, I'm going to say almost certainly, going to be moving some portable classrooms over to Lincoln for next fall, this coming fall. But if we don't have a long-term plan to address Lincoln, then we're going to be looking at brick and mortar costs at Lincoln potentially. The other driving force on why planning is recommending we consider this right now is something Brock reported on earlier, the school loan construction fund. Last time that little pile of money, which was a big pile of money, became available, it was about the exact same time we were deciding as a board to build Ed Clapp Elementary. So we immediately put application in, which requires the very action we're asking for tonight, so that we'd be in the queue and hopefully eligible to get the school loan construction money. We did get in the queue, but we were not far enough in the front of the line. They ran out of money before they got to us. Potentially, that same thing could happen to us again. And just so you understand, if we move forward, begin this process now, and based on feedback from architects and construction management firms, they believe they can get this done if we move forward in a timely manner to actually have the Eagles building set up as a K-5 building for the fall of 2016, which would mean we could put an application in for this pool of money that's going to come available, whether it's 150 million, 250 million, whatever the number is that they approve in Bismarck will evaporate just based upon the building needs of the broader K-12 community in North Dakota. Just look at what they're talking about just to our west in West Fargo, and they will be raising their hand for a huge chunk. If we approve this project to move forward with this timeline, and we end up getting the school construction loan money, based on today's bond rates, the estimated savings on our project would be $1,137,000. Some pretty significant money. Now that's based on borrowing $6 million from the state at a 1% rate, or bonding that $6 million at an approximate rate of 3%, and in both cases with a 20-year duration on payback. So based upon the economics and the demographic need, planning is here today to recommend that we authorize the administration to proceed with the process of constructing the addition on the Eagles Center to turn it into a 3-section elementary building with the opening date scheduled for the fall of 2016 at a cost up to $9 million. We're certainly hopeful it would be less.
Second. Okay, motion's on the floor. You must have done a very good job explaining that. Jim?
We did look at planning, and when I give the planning committee report, I may go into more detail on this. We did look at how exactly would we fund all of the components, including this one that we foresee in the near term from a facility need. Obviously, just to my left here, we have our operations center. We know we're going to have to relocate it. We've got a couple other fairly significant projects that we're pretty sure are going to happen too. We believe that we have the capacity. You might recall from Myron's report, I think at the last board meeting, in the building fund, if we had to bond, we could bond for the entire amount we need to right now. We also do have available fund balances that we could use. And at this point in time, the administration nor planning are coming with a specific funding recommendation. That would be coming forward assuming the board approves this action. when we have the final design work done, know what the final estimated cost is, and know what do we then have to come up with and what sources will we use. But we felt pretty comfortable in planning that the capacity is there for all of what we foresee right now. That caveat that things can change, but all of the projects that we know are online or going to be needed to be addressed, we currently have the capacity inside our building fund. And of course, if we can get this school construction loan, that just even gives us more capacity.
John?
Madam President, members of the board, it's really important we keep in mind that this isn't a new school in a new part of town. This is an addition to a building we already have where the people already are. And it's a good example of infill, putting a school where within reach of the people who are already there, especially for an elementary school. So it's important to note that. I think it's also in concert important to note that a new school would probably cost 16, 17 million or more and would be out somewhere down where there aren't people currently right now. So this addition, and it's my understanding that the $9 million number is a ceiling to give us to work within. I would be surprised if it was even close to that. But it gives us the room to go that direction. An important thing to also note is that our statutory building levy fund is already there to do this without a public vote. This is why we have this authority in our building levy fund with 26.41 mils. It's there, and we're using it, and that's what we're charged to do. And I think we're being really responsible in the deployment of taxpayer monies in the fashion that we're doing it, and I think it's important for the community to understand that. Lastly, this will, I'm understanding and sensing, will diminish the likelihood of sooner than not additional boundary changes with the population shifts into further South Fargo. So this is a great moment, again, for us to, with our facilities plan and the community engagement that took place and the budgeting accordingly to continue step by step moving forward to breathe life into that, to fit into the Goal 2030 visions of neighborhoods and neighborhood schools and walkability and infill.
Well said. Seeing no more hands, we will take a vote on this. Anne Marie?
Johnson,
Yes.
Knutson,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Paulson,
Yes.
Strand,
Yes.
Benson,
Yes.
Boyd. Yes. Goldenberg,
Yes.
Nelson.
Yes, motion carries. One more thing to your list. Let's keep moving along here. Be a board superintendent reporting 1 through 5. I would entertain a motion to accept these.
I move that we accept BSR policy as written.
Second.
Okay, motion's on the floor. A couple comments. Any further comments tonight? Okay. Anne Marie?
Knutson,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Paulson,
Yes.
Strand,
Yes.
Benson,
Yes.
Boyd. Yes. Goldenberg,
Yes.
Johnson,
Yes.
Nelson.
Yes. Thank you. Board reports. We will, our most important job as a school board is to evaluate our superintendent, hopefully just our superintendent going forward, not Brock as well. So there are some documents there that at your place, they're at my place, they're all at my place. I'll hand them around. Summative evaluation for the superintendent. We also have our formative that was sent out recently.
This is your summative
This
evaluation.
is
Your
summative,
formative
okay.
was in December.
December, okay. Having trouble keeping them all straight. So the due date on this guy will be
Friday.
Friday. So this is really important to Jeff and goes in his file, so I'm sure he would appreciate that you put a lot of thought into that. Any questions on finishing that report? Okay. Committee liaison and correspondence report. Should we start with Jim this time?
Well, as I mentioned, planning met primarily to look at some of the long-range facility planning issues facing the district. Just to update you, the three main ones that are front and center, one we just addressed, which will start a whole nother set of work for Brock and his team. The second one I referenced was the operations center, which we're obviously looking at alternatives and also still in kind of a holding pattern, waiting for, I say the city, but there's actually two components. There's the water overseer, for lack of knowing what the right name is, for the eminent domain portion that will be taken if we don't agree to. And then the city is also interested in acquiring what would remain in that building. So administration is actively working with a lot of parties on that and trying to put a timeline together. So when we get informed that they're going to tear off the backside of that building, which will probably still happen before July 4th, I have a feeling, we're in a position to figure out how we're moving forward. And then, of course, the other item from a long-range facility plan perspective that has been on our long-range radar for a while is the acquisition of future school site, probably south and west of the interstate. We looked at the funding capacities and addressed whether or not, if all of these came to fruition this year, could we afford them all? And the answer is clearly yes. So we felt pretty comfortable. We've got a lot of things going on the financial side of our district. The budget cycle is getting ramped up pretty big time in Brock's world. Obviously, Brock and many of us are tracking what's going on in the legislature because that'll affect us for our general fund numbers for the next couple of years, which we've got to then think about how do we build that into our long-range financial plan. We have a couple of members that have some conflicts on our regularly scheduled planning committee meeting, which would normally be the first Friday of the month. I unfortunately have not had an opportunity to get with Mary Ann and have her send out a communication of possible alternative times to see if we can get a full committee. But I would anticipate if you're on the planning committee to see some kind of an email coming probably from Mary Ann. I'd say it's from me, but it'll really be from Mary Ann, kind of asking you about possibilities for when we might be able to schedule the next planning committee meeting. There is an SEEC board meeting coming up. It's going to be a telephone conference because the exec director of the SEEC is really not in the Fargo location, as he's camped out in Bismarck, operating under the name of Senator at this point in time. So I'll keep you apprised as that board meeting happens. I think that's it.
Hey, Jim. John?
Madam President, members of the board, GAC met February 11th and discussed legislative issues and prepared for the February 17th breakfast meeting in Bismarck. Sometimes the universe works in different ways, but maybe a good thing, but I had no voice. That bug kept coming back, so I didn't go, and somebody else might report on what happened in Bismarck, and I think Brock alluded to it, but I was here. Our next meeting is March 18th. At 11:30, and then we'll be revisiting dates. Lastly, and I'll promise to do this in 2 hours or less. I yesterday, yesterday did my engagement at Madison School with Bobby Olson, the superintendent, and staff, and this is the most invigorating, enlightening engagement I have participated yet. It compares with almost any seminar I've gone to at the state or national levels. The topics, the insight, the conversation, the heart of our educators and where they're at with in that school in particular. And I learned so much, like reading and the matrix that he's developing for data, for reading skills from kindergarten on, putting the emphasis at kindergarten. You know, we talk about dropouts on this end of the spectrum. Well, this is the way to really address that on this end of the spectrum. And the successes and the directions the data is showing where the kids are going with their reading capabilities and reading skills, and the lessening number of students who are behind. And some of those students behind are just a little bit behind and ready to drop down into the next level. So this data is compelling, great information, and it's, I think, kind of a prototype almost in Madison, that maybe it's more than that, but that was really reassuring information to see. I have to say, we need a better sign at their front door. You know, somebody coming up, you go, which door you to go into? And you know, just a little thing, but that's important if you have somebody from the public going up and going, well, where's the entrance? Just something to note. The decorum in the school, and watching the paras, and the paras there have an immense role. And frankly, I come out of there wondering if we aren't more and more going to maybe look at our paras as our answer to our substitute teaching challenges, frankly, and deploy the resources accordingly. But the paras there, and the role of the paras, and the interaction with the paras and the staff and the teachers, and how they set the kids up and prepare the kids and develop a pattern of behavior, and right down to the word of a kid being out of behavior, and they go, reset, Kenny. Interesting. The decorum and the culture there is phenomenal. I want to say there's 11 different countries or so reflected in Madison alone. And you see Bhutan, or you see Congo, or you see the names of the countries that are reflected in the rooms that you go to. There was a topic, and lunch. I had a great lunch, by the way. And ate the food, and it was good food, and the demeanor and the flow of the kids through lunch, to me, that's really important, is that, and the staff interaction. But I'd be remiss not to just share with you some discussions that surfaced, and not long ago I had a discussion with a teacher who was from a school where there's a lot of Native American students and a lot of amazing challenges, and so this kind of permeated into my discussion with Mr. Olson, this notion of mandatory reporting and circumstances that are beyond my comprehension generally of what some kids experience and are going through in their home lives or in their worlds. And the requirement of teachers to have mandatory reporting and putting their name to it, and then it falling through the cracks, or not being urgent, or being put on a back burner, or that they don't have the money and the funding and the services to address those needs. And this is a topic that as a community we need to elevate up. That if we're going to have people forced to mandatory report circumstances, there darn well better be a system to deliver on that for the sake of the kids. And it's not always happening. There's reasons for it not happening. But this is a huge issue, especially if you're in a school setting and you know what those kids are dealing with. And somebody's going home for a weekend. Say, well, we'll get back to it next week if we do. Meanwhile, you know what the kids are doing, dealing with that weekend and the risk they're at. And I just was stunned by the implication of this discussion and needed to bring it to the board in a sense that we have our role as a school board and school district, but we as a community have to partner with the other government subdivisions and the other service providers and make sure as a village we're all coming together to take and care of our kids and protect them. So that was just a gripping, moving thing. That principal there and those staff there and the demeanor and the culture there, and they're getting a new roof. They're really pleased about that. They're really pleased that their neighborhood school's intact and protected with the long-term plan. I just couldn't say more what a gratifying engagement that was for me as just one board member.
Very good. Speaking as a mandatory reporter myself, I've been very pleased with social services following through on those, and so I think there are some good systems in place. They just don't stop at the school. they go above and beyond. But I think you're right. It's so important that those get taken care of. Rebecca?
I better have more to report at the next meeting based on what John just said. But at any rate, I am working on, it was great to listen in on that though and learn from your engagement. But I am continuing to work on my engagement at Kennedy. The original couple dates were going to be when we were out in Bismarck meeting with legislators. So any rate, rescheduling that. And I think I'll need to get my hands on the robots and see what I can do. So I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer?
So I wasn't able to attend the last Health Insurance Committee meeting because we were out in Bismarck and I didn't make it back in time. But I did email Brock and I said, if there was anything pertinent to share with the board, if you wouldn't mind doing that for me today. So thank you, Brock.
Madam President, members of the board, the Health Insurance Committee continues to work hard at looking at the plan design. And as you're aware, over the last maybe 2 years or longer, John Nelson insists it's been about 12, looking at the potential of a high deductible health plan with health savings accounts and doing something, providing some sort of a dual option where you could either stay on the current plan or look at an alternative plan. And so Brian Owen, who is our primary contact with Gallagher Benefit Consultants, as you recall that we're working with, was in attendance at the meeting and walked us through some examples and an interactive spreadsheet where we could play with deductibles, with percent of premium split between employer and employee, potential contributions to an HSA, and really started to get into the nuts and bolts of, if you look at your current spend and you look at what your target might be based on potential increases, et cetera, what could you possibly offer? And so the entirety of that meeting was spent really trying to break that apart and trying to come up with, what is out there. And that will be one of the primary things coming to planning at our next meeting. We'll be talking about, here's what we think some potential options could be. How does planning feel about that? At what point are we ready to bring something forward to the board from that committee to say, here would be our recommendation moving forward? The target on a potential change is January 1st of 16. And so we'd be looking at doing a renewal and then trying to offer a change plan. And so our consultant was there to work through that with us, took us through all those particulars. I had a follow-up meeting today with a subset of that committee that is trying to really hone in on what might those factors be that we offer in a alternative plan with the thought of fine-tuning that and bringing it to planning at our next meeting. That will be one of the agenda items.
Thank you. Brock, briefly, are any of our employees, could they be affected by the new ND PERS? I mean, could they have the option to?
Yeah, Madam President, members of the board, if I understand your question, what Robin is alluding to is the fact that ND PERS recently changed their health care provider from Blue Cross Blue Shield to Sanford, and that is for the health insurance portion that ND PERS offers. And I would say the short answer is no, because that is purely health insurance. So it's about the ND PERS that we're involved in is the retirement piece, not the health insurance piece. The only way an existing employee may be affected is the person sitting to your right whose spouse is on the ND PERS plan at a different, so yes, if we have spouses who are on the state plan, we might have employees covered under that plan, that would be the effect, but as it pertains to our involvement with PERS, no.
Thank you. David?
Excuse me. I too had to reschedule my meeting at Longfellow where we've got 2 dates for next week, so hopefully one of those is going to work. The Board of Directors of CTE is meeting tomorrow upstairs at 5:30. That's the Tech Ed Consortium we're currently in with West Fargo, Central Cass, and Northern Cass. And I think the main topic is probably going to be a collaboration that we've been working on with some local businesses to get diesel mechanics added to the current course offerings. That's tomorrow at 5:30.
Thank you. Paul?
We had a Fargo Public Schools Foundation meeting last week, and I'm looking forward to my elementary engagement coming up, hopefully in about a week to 10 days.
Thank you. Linda?
My engagement is next Wednesday at McKinley. Looking forward to that. The Community Development Committee at the city was canceled for February. I reported on January's meeting last time. Negotiation Committee met with the FEA group last Wednesday. Each group presented their list of items, and we started actually digging in and ticking off some of the items, and you'll hear more about that in executive session. Our next meeting with that group is March 11th.
Thank you. Dinah?
The communication report, basically, Anne Marie already reminded you, so I'll remind you one more time. If you haven't filled in the survey that you were sent, please do so. And when the email goes out to remind the board of the meeting on March 9th, please RSVP to Betsy or Anne Marie right away so that we know who's coming, and lunch. It's not only lunch, but we want to know how many people are going to be there so that we have enough chairs and all of the rest of it is appropriately set up, because the consultant will be here for the communication audit.
Not too much on my report this time. Thank you to those of you who were able to attend the Bismarck Legislative Breakfast. I think it was well attended. Those that were there got some good talking points from us, which I'm sure they went out and shared with their fellow legislators. Jim did a very nice job explaining the ending fund balance bill. Dr. Schatz and Mark Lemur and David Flowers also presented. So I know our legislators were thankful, and I thought it was a very positive event, and I would expect that we'll continue to do that in the future. Other than that, the next government's meeting is March 3rd, 7:30 a.m. on Tuesday. Any other reports? Brock?
Madam President, members of the board, briefly save an email to all of you. An answer to Jim's earlier question on Senate Bill 2181, that's the business manager reporting bill. To me, they're just a number. I got to remember to tell you what they are. It is legislative intent for the business manager to report directly to the school board and not the superintendent. So that is the direction that is going, and so you can direct us from there as to what, if anything, you'd like us to do with that piece of legislation as it crosses over to the House.
All right. Seeing no other reports, our next item would be a possible executive session.
I move that we convene an executive session for the purpose of negotiation strategy as permitted under North Dakota Century Code 44-04-19.1.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Suppose we need a vote on that, don't we, Anne Marie?
Myers. Paulson.
Yes.
Strand.
Yes.
Benson.
Yes.
Boyd.
Yes.
Goldenberg.
Yes.
Johnson.
No.
Knutson.
Yes.
Nelson.
Yes. The motion passes 8-1. So we will take a break from the public here, and we'll come back after we finish our executive session. So we'll just take a quick break. Okay, our next regular board meeting will be March 10th at 5:30. Items for debriefing. Okay, any other board reports, John, that you forgot? Okay. Jim's wife's birthday. Okay, very good. We are adjourned.